Celeste hadn't worn heels in years. But that morning, she slid them on with quiet intent, not for fashion, not for attention, just to hear the click of them echo against the marble floors of the law office. Something about that sound gave her a strange comfort, like armor, like walking into battle. It was her 32nd birthday. No one remembered. No one cared. Her family didn't even glance her way as she entered the room. Her mother, perfectly poised in a navy blazer, looked past her like Celeste was someone's assistant, not the granddaughter of the man whose will they were about to dissect. Her father gave her a tight, obligatory nod before turning back to his phone. Romina, her older sister, sat reclined in her chair, sunglasses pushed up like a tiara on her head, legs crossed, smile half drawn, already convinced the day belonged to her. Celeste didn't interrupt. She never had. She took the last seat at the conference table, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Always the last. Always quiet. The room smelled like lemon polish and old leather, sharp and stale like old money clinging to old grudges. She focused on that scent, let it anchor her breath as she sat beneath the weight of memory. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. This was her return into a family that had piece by piece carved her out and shoved her into silence. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. In their eyes, she was the forgotten daughter, the soft one, the quiet one, the one who walked away and dared not look back. They never imagined she'd return, and if she did, they never imagined she'd matter. But Celeste had learned something in all those years of silence. You don't need noise to be heard. You just need timing. And the sound of heels echoing through marble. That was just the beginning. The room was still until the lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Hensley, the family attorney, adjusted his glasses, then opened the worn leather folder on the table. As per Edwin Marlowe's final will, we will now proceed with the distribution of his estate. Romina shifted in her seat. Confident, smirking, she crossed one leg over the other, already assuming victory. To his granddaughter, Romina Marlowe, he began. Romina smiled without hesitation. He leaves the family cabin in Jackson Hole and his 1959 Gibson guitar. The smile cracked. Romina blinked. I'm sorry. Is that all? The lawyer didn't flinch. He moved on. To Lawrence and Evelyn Marlowe, his son and daughter-in-law, he leaves the antique grandfather clock, his record collection, and a charitable donation of $10,000 made in their name. My mother's lips parted in disbelief, a donation she echoed as if the word offended her. My father scoffed. You must be joking. He crossed his arms, face darkening by the second. Romina sat back, eyes darting between them, unsure whether to gloat or growl. The lawyer paused, then just a second too long. And to Celeste Marlowe, he said, voice steady now, he leaves his remaining financial estate, totaling $29,246,000. Silence. So deep you could hear the air leave the room. My mother's jaw dropped. My father surged forward. Excuse me. It was notarized, Mr. Hensley replied calmly. This amendment was made 3 months prior. A conscious, deliberate revision. She hasn't spoken to this family in years, my mother barked. She walked away. She abandoned us. My father's voice rose like a storm. You don't get to vanish and come back to take everything. They were no longer pretending. And still I said nothing. Mr. Hensley reached beneath the desk and pulled out a thick brown envelope sealed with the wax emblem my grandfather used for personal documents. A horse carved by hand. He passed it across the table directly to me. My fingers touched the seal. Inside, a check, and a note in his slanted handwriting. To the one who held her own in silence, you were never forgotten. I saw it all. I hadn't finished reading before my father lunged forward. He snatched the check from my lap and held it to the light, inspecting it like a counterfeit. My mother ripped the note from my hand, her voice shrill. Stay silent. Is that what he called loyalty now? She tore it in half, then again, until the words were dust. Romina leaned back smug once more. Oh, please. Grandpa just felt sorry for her. My father didn't wait. He pulled a lighter from his jacket, sparked it, and set the check on fire. Mr. Hensley shouted, "Lawrence, don't too late!" The check curled in on itself, blackened into ash, and dropped into the crystal tray on the table. Smoke curled upward. "This, my father growled, is what betrayal earns. Now we're even." They waited for me to scream, to cry, to beg, but I didn't move. Not an inch. Because what they burned wasn't what they thought. That check, it wasn't real. Just a decoy. The real one, along with the trust documents, was tucked into the inner lining of my coat. Safe, untouchable. Exactly where Grandpa told me to keep it. I looked up, eyes clear, pulse steady, and watched them gloat. Let them celebrate. Let them think they won. Because the fire they started wasn't mine to fear. It was the one they'd have to answer for. And the war. It had only just begun. I didn't go home after the reading. I didn't respond to the messages, the missed calls, or the chaos now spreading like wildfire across group chats and social media threads. Instead, I drove slow steady to the one place no one knew I was going. Langford Vault and Estate Security, a private banking facility hidden on the outskirts of the city where my grandfather had kept his most private affairs. At the reception, I handed over the brass key he once gave me, wrapped in a silk handkerchief on my 18th birthday. "You'll need this one day," he'd said then, voice gentle when it's time to choose truth over peace. The woman behind the desk tapped her keyboard, then glanced up. "Box number 8. She paused. "Under your name. It's ready." She led me down a quiet hallway lined with cedar panels and heavy silence. No cameras, no windows, just thick doors and whispered security. Inside the room, I was alone. One metal box, one brass key, and the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The lock clicked softly as I turned the key. Dust rose. Light spilled from the overhead lamp. And inside, placed deliberately, like artifacts in a museum, were 3 things: a folded check, a black velvet pouch containing a USB, a legal folder sealed with red ribbon. I sat down. Slowly. My fingers trembled as I reached for the check first. The paper felt heavy, thicker than standard stock, with the familiar embossed seal of my grandfather's personal banking account. His name. My name. $29,246,000. Signed in the same slanted script that once wrote me birthday cards. It was real. Unmistakably, irrevocably real. What they burned. Just a distraction. Next, I opened the pouch. The USB was simple, unlabeled. I pulled out my laptop, slid it into the port, and clicked the only file inside, for Celeste, Play Me First. The screen flickered. Then there he was. My grandfather seated in his old study, surrounded by the dusty volumes he loved and the lamp I used to hide under when storms frightened me. "If you're watching this," he began, "then they did exactly what I feared they would." His voice was tired but unshaken. "They called you cold. They called you difficult. But I saw through it all. I saw how they shut you out, how they drained your light, then blamed you for the shadows." He looked straight at the camera, as if he were looking directly at me. "They took your name off the family trust. They erased you from the birthdays, the holidays, the stories they told to strangers. But I didn't forget." His hands folded on his lap. "You never asked for anything, and yet you gave more than they ever noticed. You loved them even as they sharpened knives behind your back." I bit the inside of my cheek, tears welling but not falling. "You were the only one who stayed silent and kind, even when they thought silence meant weakness. But I know the truth. Silence is strength when it comes with clarity." He leaned forward. "This money. It's not the real gift. The real gift is knowing who you are even when the world tries to convince you otherwise." The screen faded to black. The room felt heavier now. I turned to the legal folder. Inside were 3 documents. 2 older wills, one from 8 years ago, one from 3. In both, Romina and my parents were the sole beneficiaries. Handwritten notes in the margins Celeste would never ask, but she deserves it. And finally, the revised transfer signed, notarized, sealed, naming me as the sole heir to the entire financial estate. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about clarity, legitimacy, vindication. My breath came slower now, my shoulders eased just a little. He knew. He'd seen it all, the isolation, the manipulation, the subtle erasure of who I was. But he didn't forget me. He didn't let them win. As I tucked the check, the USB, and the folder into my coat, I whispered what I hadn't dared say in years I exist. And I remember everything. The morning after the vault, something felt off. Not wrong, exactly, just misaligned. I tried to transfer a small amount from the new account, just enough for groceries and gas. Transaction failed. I tried logging into my banking app again. Error account not found. Odd. I assumed maybe there was a delay, a system update, something that could be easily resolved with a phone call. But when I called, the woman on the line asked me to verify my name. Celeste Ward. Pause. I'm sorry, she said, confused. There's no active account under that name. In fact, our system lists that identity as deceased. I didn't understand. You must be mistaken, I said slowly. I'm right here. But she had already moved on, politely offering to connect me with the legal department. I hung up. Half an hour later, I drove to the city records office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A man behind the desk took my ID, typed something into the system, then frowned. He tapped the keyboard again, and again, then looked up at me. Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. He rotated the monitor. There it was. Status deceased. Date of death 2 weeks ago. Caused pedestrian collision. Confirmed by dental records. My hand gripped the edge of the counter. This can't be. I'm alive. His face was pale. You'll have to file a correction, he said gently. It happens. Rare, but not impossible. You'll need to bring documents, proof of ID, Social Security, original birth certificate, something that confirms you're who you say you are. I whispered. They erased me. He didn't answer, just slid me a correction form. I walked out of the building like a ghost, my own footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't even feel the wind, only the weight of something much colder, non-existence. Back at the apartment, I tried everything. My old driver's license flagged, my passport under investigation, my Social Security number marked as inactive due to death. Even my health records were gone, replaced by a duplicate entry warning. I wasn't just cut off, I had been legally erased. No one had to hurt me physically. They just deleted me one line of data at a time. Even my name, Celeste Ward, was being phased out. In its place, a digital echo, a placeholder marked invalid. It was then that the realization dropped in like ice down the back of my spine. They weren't just punishing me. They were rewriting me. And if I didn't act now, if I didn't find a way to resurrect the truth, I'd vanish forever. Alive, but not legally real. The message came just after dawn. No name, no number, just a quiet buzz, a voicemail. I hesitated. I almost deleted it. But something instinct maybe told me to press play. And then a voice, soft but steady, filled the quiet kitchen. Celeste, this is Melba. I worked with your grandfather for 21 years. Her voice wavered, older now, tired, but not uncertain. If you open the vault, you've seen part of it. But not all. You need to listen closely now. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear like it held a heartbeat. They're not just trying to take the money. They're trying to make you disappear. Erase you. Not just from the will, but from record, from memory, from every legal thread that connects you to the family name. Because if you don't exist, you can't contest anything. My breath caught. I had felt it already, but hearing someone name it out loud, it made it real. He knew they would do this. Melba continued. That's why he left the second key. That's why he chose me. The line crackled softly, static, like wind over old tape. There's a storage facility just off Highway 17. Unit 19B. You'll need the brass key he gave you when you turned 18. The one you thought was just symbolic. It's not. A pause. Inside that unit is the truth they buried. It's where he put the final safeguard. He trusted you to find it quietly. Don't bring anyone. And Celeste. Another pause. If you hesitate now, they win. Then, silence. I stood there, phone still in hand, heart pounding not with fear, but with clarity. Melba. She had vanished from the estate records the day the will was read. No mention. No goodbye. People assumed she'd been paid off, replaced, forgotten. But she hadn't left. She had stayed silent, just like I had, watching from the shadows. She was the one person left who remembered the truth, the one who still believed in it. I moved to the drawer near the stove and pulled it open. There it was, the brass key, given to me by my grandfather on my 18th birthday, wrapped in a faded handkerchief with just one line. "You'll need this someday, when you're ready to stand your ground." I never knew what it meant. Not until now. That day had come. I was done waiting. The drive to the old storage unit was quiet. No music, no phone calls, just the low hum of the tires and the sound of my own breath. The air was heavy, coastal damp, the kind that hangs in your lungs like fog. When I arrived, Unit 19B looked almost too ordinary. A dented lock, faded numbers. It could have belonged to anyone, but it didn't. It belonged to the last version of me my grandfather had protected. The brass key slid in with a soft click. The door creaked open, rusty hinges complaining against time. Dust stirred in the air like memory. Inside metal shelves, old boxes, a broken lamp. And at the center, exactly where he meant for me to find it, was a black fireproof briefcase. Taped on top a note in his familiar script, fading but firm. "If they ever burn you open this." My hands trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. I sat down on an overturned crate and opened the clasps. Inside were three things: a folded legal document, a stack of property deeds, and a small velvet pouch with a USB stick tucked inside. I unfolded the first paper. The original will, signed, dated, witnessed, with my name, Celeste Marine, designated as sole beneficiary. There were no edits, no footnotes, no tricks. The second stack took my breath. Land deeds, property transfers, each marked with a raised seal, each listing me not my parents, not Romina, me. A vineyard outside Sonoma, a townhouse in Charleston, a stretch of land near the coast he always called his quiet place. The last file was even more personal, my original birth certificate. No changes, no hyphenated names, no attempts to dilute the truth. I blinked hard, swallowed the lump rising in my throat. For the first time in years, I wasn't just someone's mistake. I wasn't forgotten. I was written into history quietly but clearly. Then came the video. I didn't wait. I slid the USB into my laptop and pressed play. There he was, my grandfather, sitting in his old sunroom, books stacked behind him, light falling across his face like memory. His eyes were tired but alert. His voice a whisper wrapped in strength. "If you're watching this, they've done what I feared. They've tried to erase you, to erase what you are. But listen to me, Celeste. This was never about money." He leaned forward. I leaned with him. "They're not afraid of what you inherit. They're afraid of what you represent. You were never the problem. You were the one they couldn't control, and that's what terrified them." A pause. "The land, the assets, the trust, they're yours now. Not because of guilt, not out of pity, but because you earned them by staying silent when silence was survival." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "They will scream. They will spin. They'll try to bury you again. But now you have the tools, the truth, the name. And this time, don't let them take it." The screen faded to black. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, whole, written into the story they tried to burn. The courtroom smelled like paper and old pride. Polished shoes clicked across tiled floors. Whispers floated like dust motes in sunlight. Celeste sat near the back spine's straight hair, tied in a low knot, just as her grandfather used to wear his before every board meeting. Across the room, her parents laughed lightly with their lawyer. Romina scrolled on her phone heels, swinging beneath the bench like a teenager in detention. She glanced up just once, smirking, mouthing the words, "You don't stand a chance." Their confidence was blinding. They'd come dressed for victory. The judge, an older woman with deep lines across her forehead and steel gray eyes, entered with quiet command. "All rise," the clerk said. And so it began. The opposing counsel started first. They made it sound polished, airtight, pre-written. Miss Celeste Ward is attempting to claim inheritance through a fabricated will. Our clients, her immediate family, have long-standing documentation proving their rightful claim. And, Your Honor, we must address that Miss Ward was officially declared deceased 3 weeks ago. It is unclear how she's even standing here. There were a few chuckles. Celeste didn't move. Her lawyer stood. No theatrics, just 3 items placed deliberately on the desk: a USB drive, a legal portfolio of land deeds and trust documents, a sworn affidavit from a forensic document examiner, and 2 digital forensics experts detailing how Celeste's death certificate had been fabricated and her records tampered with from inside a private server. "Your Honor," her lawyer said quietly, "we ask that you hear the deceased in his own words." The judge nodded. The lights dimmed slightly as the video played. Celeste didn't watch the screen, she watched her family. Her father's face as the truth unraveled. Her mother's lips pursed tighter with every word her grandfather spoke. Romina dropped her phone. The judge leaned forward, elbow on the bench, eyes fixed on the man in the video. They erased her, not because she was wrong, but because she was uncontrollable. And that terrified them more than losing money. The video ended. The room didn't move for a full 5 seconds. Then the judge spoke, voice like steel drawn across silk. "In my 34 years, I have never seen a case so meticulously sinister, so silently cruel." She paused. The extent to which this family went to fake death records, altered trusts, and stripped legal identity. It is not only appalling, it is criminal. The courtroom held its breath. I will be referring this case to criminal investigators. As of this moment, the court recognizes Celeste Marlowe Ward as the sole beneficiary of Edwin Marlowe's estate, and the only one in this room who honored the truth. She turned to Celeste. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. They tried to bury you alive, but here you are breathing, and more real than they ever allowed you to be." No one applauded, no one dared. Celeste simply nodded once, then stood calmly as her family finally sat in silence. Not from choice, but from defeat. The courtroom emptied slowly. No chaos, no shouting, just the cold shuffle of expensive shoes on polished floors as reputations unraveled like loose thread. Celeste didn't look back. Behind her, the judge's ruling echoed like a final bell. All secondary claims were dismissed. The estate was locked. A federal investigation was opened into the forgery, fraud, and attempted identity erasure. Romina's voice had cracked, first whispering something about appeal. Her father shouted about legacy. Her mother sat still, stunned into a silence she'd never gifted Celeste before. But Celeste. She simply stood, collected the final copy of the ruling, and walked past them. Past their lawyer, past the people who once refused to see her. Outside, the world was gray with mist. A drizzle coated the courthouse steps like glass. She stepped into it, coat buttoned, breath steady. One reporter moved forward. "Miss Ward, any comment? Will you speak to your family again?" She paused. Just once. And then they burned a check as if they were burning a symbol. But my grandfather left me something far more enduring. Justice, and my name written by his own hand. No further questions. She walked away as the rain deepened, quiet, unwavering. No vengeance, no grand declaration. Only the sound of her heels on wet concrete, the echo of someone who had been erased and wrote herself back in ink no one could wash away.